Hello everyone, this is Dr. Michael Zimmerman again, and welcome back to Myth and Culture, Anthropology 111. And today we're going to be moving on to Unit 3 on Goddesses, otherwise known as Chapter 3 in your book, Myth and Knowing by Scott Leonard and Michael McClure. In this unit, we're going to be talking about the roles of various goddesses in world mythology, but we're also going to be talking about anthropologically what these myths can teach us about gender relations, the nature of matriarchy versus patriarchy, and we're also going to talk about various anthropological theories about goddesses as well. So what do the terms matriarchy and patriarchy mean? Well, a matriarchy, simply put, is a social system in which females hold the primary power position in roles of political, social, religious, and cultural leadership and maintain control over property. This is as opposed to a patriarchy, a social system in which males hold the primary power positions in roles of political, social, religious, and cultural leadership and maintain control over property. Now, it's important to note that no one culture is either a pure patriarchy or a pure matriarchy. Both exist somewhere on an overall spectrum. For example, the Dogon people of West Africa, as we may have seen in one of our earlier myths, Ama and Numo, from the Dogon of West Africa, the Dogon are a very patriarchal or very male-dominated society. Men controlled all political, social, religious, and cultural forms of leadership. They maintained control over property. Mythology was strictly passed down from father to son. Women were actually forbidden from knowing Dogon mythology. And additionally, they were also, or are also, patrilineal. That is, everything is passed down from father to son. Contrast this with Native American tribes, such as the Iroquois and Hopi, who are far more matriarchal. That is, that women had control over political, social, religious, and cultural leadership roles, and they maintained control over property. In each Iroquois settlement, there was an Iroquois communal property called the Iroquois Longhouse, in which the matriarch ruled completely. The matriarch had control over all property and redistributed that property to the rest of the tribe as she saw fit. Additionally, we can also take a look at other aspects of matriarchy in Iroquois culture as well. The Iroquois as a whole ran an intertribal democratic republic starting from around 1550 to 1722 AD. At its height, this Iroquois League controlled a vast territory that included the Great Lakes watershed, extending from the Atlantic coast to Michigan and from Ontario to North Carolina. Each of the League's nations, including the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuna, Seneca, and Tuscarora, were represented by delegates elected from nominations submitted by the tribe's mothers. Tribal chiefs, too, used primarily and only for wartime activities, owed their position to matrilineal succession and acted with the consent and cooperation of their tribe's women of childbearing age. So we can see that no matter what happens, even though there are cultures that are more patriarchal, such as the Dogon, and more matriarchal, such as the Iroquois and Hopi, there are others that are somewhat in the middle. Now, there are other aspects of matriarchy and patriarchy as well, which you've heard me refer to in a couple of different places. Let's go over these. First, we have the terms matrifocal and patrifocal. A matrifocal family structure is one where mothers head families and fathers play a less important role in the home and in bringing up children. This is as contrasted to a patrifocal family structure, in which fathers head families and mothers play a less important role in the home and bringing up children. Again, these exist on some form of scale. For example, in ancient Rome, the father was the head of the family, referred to as the pater familias, and as one would expect in a patriarchal culture, had absolute control over his wife and children. However, despite the fact that the father was the head of the family, the mother still played an important role in the home and bringing up children. So we can see that most cultures existed somewhere in the middle. Another term we can look into is the terms matrilineal and patrilineal. Matrilineality is the tracing of descent through the female line. Property, status, myths, family lore, etc. are all passed down from mother to daughter. The Tuareg people of North Africa, the Iroquois, and the Hopi are all examples of matrilineal cultures. We saw this in the myth of Sky Woman from chapter 1. When Sky Woman's daughter was born, it was mentioned that she would talk to her daughter. Quote, "She raised her daughter and taught her the ways of women beings. She taught her the ways of sorcery she had learned long ago. She told her of her origins and cautioned her never to forget what she was taught or the stories she was told." This indicates the passing of mythological stories down from generation to generation, from mother to daughter. Contrast this with the Dogon, where these stories were only passed down from father to son, and women were actually forbidden from knowing their mythologies, and we can see what patrilineal means, or how patrilineal exists. A third term we're going to look at are the terms matrilocal and patrilocal. A matrilocal family structure is one in which a couple, once married, moves into the bride's parents' residence. Traditionally, a dowry, some form of property, gifts, or money, whether literal or symbolic, is presented to the groom's family. Contrast this with a patrilocal family structure, which is one in which a couple, once married, moves into the groom's parents' residence, and traditionally a dowry is presented to the bride's family. This whole term of matrilocal versus patrilocal family structure is a very difficult one for modern Americans to grasp. In our own culture, ostensibly, by the time we've married, we've moved out of our parents' households and struck out on our own. However, in many traditional communities, moving in with either the bride's family or the groom's family has a number of additional benefits, both financial and social, as grandparents can play a very important role in the raising of children. Examples of a matrilocal family structure may be found, for example, in ancient Vietnam. In the story A Taste of Earth, from chapter 3 of your book, the goddess Ao Ko teaches the people of Vietnam how the marriage ritual should work. And I quote, "When children came of age, they could marry. A young woman's parents would bring an offering of salt to a young man's parents to request that a marriage be arranged. If the young man's parents agreed, the young man was sent to live with his bride's family. At the wedding, the bride and groom received sweet rice from everyone in the village. The ceremony itself was simple. Bride and groom shared a meal of sweet rice together. After the wedding, they continued to live with the bride's family." This clearly indicates that ancient Vietnamese culture was a matrilocal family structure. Contrast this with, say, the story of Inanna and Dumuzi from Sumerian mythology, in which Inanna gets married, is presented a dowry of milk and cream by Dumuzi, and is told by her mother that Dumuzi will be her family now, that she will be entering into Dumuzi's family. Quote, "Inanna ran to Ningal, the mother who bore her. Ningal counseled her daughter, saying, 'My child, the young man will be your father. My daughter, the young man will be your mother. He will treat you like a father. He will care for you like a mother. Open the house, my lady, open the house.'" Now, does this literally mean that Dumuzi will now be not just Inanna's husband, but also her mother and father? Of course not. This actually indicates that the Sumerians had a patrilocal family structure in which Inanna would be moving in with Dumuzi's family rather than the other way around. It is important to note all of these aspects of matriarchy and patriarchy. There are some cultures, such as the Iroquois, in which all of these, matriarchy, matrifocality, matrilineality, and matrilocal residence are all present. And some cultures like the Dogon, in which patriarchy, patrifocality, patrilineality, and patrilocal resonance are all present as well. But most cultures exist somewhere in the middle of this spectrum. Part of your job for your readings for Unit 3 will be to take a close look at the myths from Chapter 3 and determine where they land on this scale. What aspects of these cultures are matrifocal or patrifocal, matriarchal or patriarchal, matrilineal or patrilineal, or matrilocal or patrilocal. From here, we're going to move on and talk about another important aspect of the study of goddesses. And this is a particular anthropological and archaeological theory known as the goddess movement. As archaeologists began excavating Stone Age and early Bronze Age sites in Europe, they came upon some curious discoveries. Small stone figurines of women with exaggerated gender attributes, likely indicating fertility, including swollen breasts, swollen bellies, and exposed genitalia and enlarged breasts. Because these were fertility figurines, these early excavators referred to them as Venus figurines. Examples include the Venus of Willendorf from Willendorf, Austria, dated to about 22,000 to 21,000 BC, the Venus of Lausel from Lausel, France, from circa 20,000 to 18,000 BC, and others. These Venus figurines were also commonly found with fertility symbols. In the case of this one, the Venus of Lausel, we see that she's holding a horn. The horn was a symbol of fertility all the way from the Stone Age through to the present day. To this day, we still have examples of fertility symbols on our own kitchen tables. During Thanksgiving, do you ever have an example of a cornucopia or horn of plenty on your table? If you do, this is an example of a pagan fertility symbol dating all the way back to the Stone Age and the Venus of Lausel. Now, early archaeologists didn't quite know what to make of this, until a German scholar by the name of Johann Jakob Bachofen had an idea. Now, it is important to note that this is simply a theory. This is not a hard and true fact. Because these Venus figurines date from prehistoric times, we have no written evidence to indicate whether the goddess movement is a valid idea or not. And we have little indications as to whether these cultures were matriarchal, patriarchal, or far more egalitarian with regards to gender relations. What we can say is that the goddess movement is a very, very important theory in world mythology and should be studied carefully. Our last thing that we want to talk about today is how your book, Myth and Knowing by Scott Leonard and Michael McClure, identifies different types of goddesses. Their typology, or list of types of different goddesses, focuses around what they call literary types, types of goddesses that are not based on patterns of behavior or their attributes, but rather on their place in mythological texts. There are four basic goddesses that are described in your book. These are the triple goddess, also called the triune goddess, the goddess of life, the goddess of death, and the goddess of regeneration. So how do we identify each of these types? Let's start with the triple goddess. The triple, or triune goddess, was a common figure in very many early matriarchal or matrifocal pantheons, but also in patriarchal and patrifocal pantheons. The triple goddess, simply put, is a goddess consisting of a set of feminine deities, or three aspects of the same deity, symbolic of the three major phases of the woman's life: maiden, past; matron, present; and crone, the future. The type of the triple goddess is exhibited in sets of three feminine deities, such as the three Greek fates, who would weave the thread of your life, measure it out, and then clip the thread when your life was over; the three matres, or mothers, from Roman mythology; or in a number of goddesses who can shift their form between these three phases of life: maiden, matron, and crone. Examples of triple or triune goddesses in world mythology include Athena, who is able to disguise herself as an old woman to appear before Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey. Artemis, who is able to change her form between these three phases of a woman's life with ease, and who represented the different phases of the moon. And Pele from Hawaiian mythology, who, when she was in the hearth of her volcano pit at Mount Kilauea in Hawaii, appeared as an old crone with skin rugged and blackened and hair the color of cinders. However, whenever Pele would emerge from her volcano, she would appear as a beautiful maiden, the most beautiful of all maidens to ever have existed. The second type of goddess is the goddess of life, which can be divided into two subtypes, the mother goddess and the culture hero. Mother goddesses are life givers, presences that birth, feed, clothe, teach, and guard all living things. They're frequently prominent figures in creation myths and literally give birth to different aspects of the world. These include Gaia, or the earth, in Greek mythology, the earth goddess in Dogon mythology, or Sky Woman in Iroquois mythology. However, goddesses of life can also be culture heroes. Culture heroes are individuals, usually goddesses and sometimes gods, but also sometimes heroes who oversee the institutions that create conditions for security and contentment, prosperity and growth, creativity and artistry, and marriage and family. These are often gods or goddesses who are the givers of some form of technology, such as the givers of fire, or the givers of food. They are also very frequently the givers of mythology. These are goddesses who primarily act as teachers. Examples include Hera, the goddess of marriage from Greek mythology, Athena, the goddess of technology and civilization from Greek mythology, and White Buffalo Calf Woman from Lakota mythology. All three of these may be examples of culture heroes. And while Hera may also be considered a mother goddess, Athena and White Buffalo Calf Woman were both virgin goddesses, and thus do not fit into the first type of mother goddess, but can be very securely identified as culture heroes. Other examples we might see are Nara, the Indian goddess of long life, Coatalique, the mother earth goddess of the Aztecs, both of whom are stereotypical mother goddesses, but we also see Mat, the Egyptian goddess of justice, fulfilling a role of a culture hero very similar to that of Athena. Our third type of goddess is the goddess of death. These goddesses are manifestations of tombs in the underworld. They often appear in mythological narratives as one of three subtypes: goddesses of causing death, goddesses of overseeing death, or witches and spellcasters. Goddesses of causing death are often goddesses who are violent and temperamental in nature. An example might be Pele from Hawaiian mythology. In the story of Pele, she and her sisters are playing and bathing in the ocean near Mount Kilauea when she goes inside a cavern to sleep. Before she fell asleep, she said to her sister who was beside her sister who was named Ha'iaka of the Fire Bloom, quote, "Let me sleep until I awake of my own accord. If any of you should attempt to awaken me before, it will be death to you all." Now, I'll certainly say that my wife is not a morning person, and yet she has never said that sort of thing to me. Pele, as a goddess of volcanoes and fire, can very easily be identified as a goddess of death. Other goddesses, however, are goddesses of overseeing death. Examples include Persephone, the goddess of the underworld in Greek mythology, or Izanami, the goddess of the underworld in Japanese mythology, or perhaps Ereshkigal, goddess of the underworld in Sumerian mythology. Goddesses of death also frequently act as witches and spellcasters, those who have divine powers that are often used in a strange or malevolent way. Examples include Hecate from Greek mythology, Lilith from Judaic folklore, and of course, Hera also can be this in myth of Callisto and Arcas from Greek mythology, when she took her husband Zeus's lover, Callisto, and using her powers turned her into a bear as a form of revenge. All of these goddesses are life takers, presences that determine the life cycles of all things and maintain contact with the other worldly. This type of goddess is frequently found in myths that attempt to explain the seasonal cycles of spring, summer, fall, and winter. Persephone from Greek mythology is a great example of this. When she was brought into the underworld 6 months out of the year by her husband Hades, her mother Demeter would cause the fall and winter. She would neglect her duties and the world would grow cold. But when Persephone would return to the earth, her mother Demeter, the goddess of nature, would become happy again, and spring and summer would occur. Just like the Fates are examples of goddesses of death and triple goddesses, I would say that while the Fates are also examples of triple goddesses, they are also examples of death goddesses, as they apportion each person his or her share of life, health, and prosperity. Again, examples of goddesses of death include Izanami, the Japanese goddess of the underworld, Lilith, the Judaic figure of death and mysticism, and the three Fates from Greek mythology. Our last type of goddess is the fourth and final type, the goddess of regeneration. These goddesses are manifestations of sexual desire, inspiration, beauty, regeneration, and renewal. They often appear in mythological narratives as one or more of four subtypes: figures of erotic power, fertility goddesses, healers, and diviners and fortune tellers. Figures of erotic power and fertility goddesses are very common. Examples include Aphrodite from Greek mythology or Inanna from Sumerian mythology. Inanna in particular fits this bill as both a figure of erotic power and fertility goddess. In her story, in the story of Inanna and Dumuzi, she marries the shepherd Dumuzi, and together on their wedding night, they begin to make love. As they do so, she exhibits language which is heavily sexualized in nature, but which is also very closely connected to the fertility of the earth and is a metaphor for farming and agriculture. Quote, Inanna opened the door for him. Inside the house, she shone before him like the light of the moon. Dumuzi looked at her joyously. He pressed his neck close against hers. He kissed her. Inanna spoke. What I tell you, let the singer weave into song. What I tell you, let it flow from ear to mouth. Let it pass from old to young. My vulva, the horn, the boat of heaven, is full of eagerness like the young moon. My untilled land lies fallow. As for me, Inanna, who will plow my vulva? Who will plow my high field? Who will plow my wet ground? As for me, the young woman, who will plow my vulva? Who will station the ox there? Who will plow my vulva? Dumuzi replied, Great lady, the king will plow your vulva. I, Dumuzi the king, will plow your vulva. Now notice that this language is not only heavily sexualized, but it also uses a lot of agriculture imagery as well, and fertility symbols. Both the horn and the moon are symbols of fertility connected to particularly the fertility of women. We have Inanna refer to her genitalia as wet ground, untilled land. She even uses a euphemism for sex, which is still even used today, the idea of, quote unquote, to plow. So this is a very, very common idea. Another interesting thing is that she refers to Dumuzi, her husband, as the king. However, at the start of the myth of Inanna and Dumuzi, he is in fact a shepherd and not a king. So what does this indicate? Well, it indicates that erotic power is not just the power of women to reproduce and their connection to the fertility of the earth. it's also about their connection to legitimize royal power. In ancient Sumeria, there was a ritual of divine right, which is to say, a ritual that showed how earthly authority comes from a divine source. In this ritual, supposedly, the king of Sumeria would have sex with the high priestess of Inanna, and while the high priestess was channeling the spirit of the goddess. If the king pleased the goddess sexually, then he would be granted a long and favorable reign. We see this as a microcosm, sort of a microcosm of this, in the myth of Inanna and Dumuzi, because as they begin to have sex, she begins to transfer this divine royal kingly power to him. Quote, "The queen of heaven, the heroic woman greater than her mother, who is presented the May," that is divine words or divine spells, divine powers, by Enki, Inanna, the first daughter of the moon, decreed the fate of Dumuzi. "In battle I am your leader, in combat I am your armor bearer, in the assembly I am your advocate, on the campaign I am your inspiration. You, the chosen shepherd of the holy shrine, you, the king, the faithful provider of Uruk, you the light of great An's great shrine. In all ways you are fit to hold your head high in the lofty dais, to sit on the lapis lazuli throne, to cover your head with the holy crown, to wear long clothes on your body, to bind yourself with the garments of kingship, to carry the mace and sword, to guide straight the long bow and arrow, to fasten the throw stick and sling at your side, to race on the road with the holy scepter in your hand and holy sandals on your feet, to prance on the holy breast like a lapis lazuli calf." As we can see, Inanna is transferring a lot of royal power to Dumuzi in this myth. And many anthropologists and archaeologists believe that this reflects an actual ritual which was performed by the Sumerians. Now, goddesses of regeneration were not just fertility goddesses and figures of erotic power. They were also healers and diviners and fortune tellers. An example of this may be Ha'iaka, the goddess from Hawaiian mythology, who is the sister of the goddess Pele. As Pele lay in the cavern asleep, as we talked about in our last section on the goddesses of death, she would not wake. So Pele's sisters sent for Ha'iaka, who came back, chanted over her body, and brought her back to life again. This shows her role as a healer and therefore also as a goddess of regeneration. In addition, when the messenger came to pick her up, Ha'iaka had a vision of her forest grove being burned to the ground by Pele's fires. This would later turn out to be a vision of the future, cementing her role as a diviner or fortune teller as well. So here we can see that both Inanna from Sumerian mythology and Ha'iaka from Hawaiian mythology are both great examples of goddesses of regeneration. Other examples we might see are Medea from Greek mythology, Hathor, the Egyptian goddess of love, or Ixchel, the Mayan goddess of love and marriage. Now this concludes our section on gods and goddesses. However, this also brings us to your essay for Unit 3. For this essay, I would like you to pick one and only one of the following myths to write your essay on. These are the fire goddess, about the goddesses Pele and Ha'iaka from Hawaii, white buffalo calf woman from the Lakota and Brule Sioux, Native American nations, the courtship of Inanna and Dumuzi from Sumerian myth in ancient Mesopotamia, a taste of earth from Vietnam, and the story of Callisto and Arcas from Ovid's Metamorphoses of Greek and Roman mythology. As you go through and read whichever of these myths you choose, I want you to construct a 1,000-word essay which answers the following questions about that myth. What types of goddesses may be found in this story, according to Chapter 3 of your book, and why may they be identified as this type of goddess? I've already covered some examples of this type in this video lecture. Please refer back to this video lecture if you need help on identifying these goddess types. Question 2. What elements of patriarchy may be found in this narrative? This includes not just patriarchy, but also patrifocality, patrilineality, and patrilocal residence. Question 3. What elements of matriarchy may be found in this narrative? This includes, of course, not just matriarchy, but matrifocality, patrilineality, and patrilocal residence. Remember that each of these cultures, although one may be more patriarchal or matriarchal than the other, both have balance in aspects of each. For example, an Iroquois myth would be far more matriarchal, but it would still have elements of patriarchy. Another myth, such as Callisto and Arcas from Greek and Roman mythology, because it comes from a heavily patriarchal society, would be much more patriarchal, but still have elements of matriarchy. Be sure to include both of these in your essay. I wish you luck. Please be sure to complete this essay by the completion of this unit as listed on Blackboard. If you have any questions or comments, please post to the forum under this unit on Blackboard. I will be checking it daily throughout Unit 3, and I wish you the best of luck. I'll be also happy to answer your questions or concerns via email at any time as well. Thank you very much, and I'll see you at Unit 4.